I uncovered my grandfather's sinister rules in the Alaskan wilderness. Now I'm haunted by what is to come. Emma stepped out of her car, her heart racing as she gazed at the imposing walls of the family cabin. It loomed like a dark sentinel in the middle of the eerie wilderness, the pine trees swaying ominously as the wind howled. It felt as if the woods were whispering secrets, secrets she'd never wanted to uncover but found herself drawn to nonetheless. A wave of nostalgia washed over her, but it was immediately tainted by the chilling presence of her grandfather's recent death. She had to confront the family's hidden legacy. Once inside, she was enveloped by a suffocating silence. The scent of old wood mingled with something else, something stale and long forgotten, lurking in the corners like a ghost. The creaking floorboards sang a mournful tune as she stepped carefully through the gloom. "Why did I come back?" she whispered to herself, but the answer lay buried somewhere within. She felt it, a cold grip that seemed to pull her deeper into the shadows. Pushing past the heavy memories, she found her grandfather's journal lying open on the table. Its pages were dog-eared and faded, filled with odd drawings and cryptic rules that clawed at her curiosity. Each word seemed to throb with a haunting energy. It was unsettling, whispering of rituals he practiced alone. "Do not enter the woods at night," one entry warned. "They are never empty." The once warm recollections of summers spent laughing with cousins faded quickly, suffocated under the weight of these ominous notes. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The first night in the cabin was restless. Shadows darted just beyond her line of sight. She kept straining to listen, heart pounding against her ribcage. A low rustling outside sent shivers racing down her spine. Was it just the trees, or something more sinister? She gripped the journal tighter, trying to find comfort in its pages yet feeling its power just as heavily. The wind rattled the cabin like a warning bell, and her unease morphed into something darker, something she could almost feel pressing onto her chest. The next evening, chilling whispers floated through the cracks in the wood, calling her name. "Emma, come to us." It was unmistakable. Panic swelled in her throat as she considered what her grandfather had warned. Each night, the tension thickened, merging memory with horror, and the isolation felt suffocating. Her pulse raced when she caught a glimpse of a figure darting past the window. It the same fleeting shape each time, like a lost halo beckoning her away. Carl, the neighbor with a glint in his eye, always hovered too close for comfort, as if he were waiting for something unknown. His laughter hung in the air like a taunt. "You don't know what you're getting into, do you?" he whispered with a knowing glance, causing dread to settle like a stone in her gut. With every passing hour, Emma felt the pull of her grandfather's sinister legacy tighten. The journal no longer served as a comfort but a countdown. The woods outside were alive with a dark energy, and a question loomed larger with each crazy night of unrest. Was she destined to unearth what lay buried within her family, or would it consume her before she had the chance? Just then, her phone vibrated against the table. It was a hauntingly familiar number she hesitated to open. The message read, "They're waiting for you, just like he said they would." A scream caught in her throat, bringing with it the undeniable realization that the sanctuary of her grandfather's cabin had become a trap, closing in on her. The wind howled outside, echoing her panic, and she knew, as hands gripped her heart and shadows danced, she had nowhere left to hide. Emma's breath caught as she stared at the screen, the words burning into her mind. She dropped the phone, and it clattered against the wooden floor, the sound echoing in the stillness. The wind screamed through the cracks, as if mocking her terror. Her heart hammered furiously, each thought a countdown to whatever fate awaited her. She glanced toward the window, visions of the shadow outside flickering in her thoughts. Should she really go out there? What if the stories her grandfather penned were true? The woods were alive, breathing, and hungry. She grabbed the journal again, desperately flipping through the pages as if they could offer some solution. Instead, they wrapped around her like cold fingers, constricting any shred of hope. "Do not trust the call of blood," one entry read, scribbled with a hasty hand. Blood. Her gut twisted. It felt personal, as if her grandfather had known a darkness that transcended the natural fear of the woods. Another message on her phone buzzed, pulling her back. "Find the circle, it waits for you." The cabin creaked in protest as she rose, compelled by an unseen force, her feet moving before her mind could center. She opened the door, the chilly air biting into her skin. The wind howled louder, a cacophony that seemed to pin her against the doorframe. But despite the terror gnawing at her, she stepped into the inky blackness beyond, feeling the embrace of the dense trees. "Emma!" A voice rang out, urgent and jagged. It was Carl, just outside the boundary of the cabin's porch light. "You shouldn't be out here. It's not safe, come back inside." The flicker of his flashlight momentarily illuminated his face, and she saw something wild in his eyes, something desperate. "What do you know?" she shouted, but her voice trembled, betraying her fear. "More than you realize. The circle, it's a trap. He knows you came back." His warning sent a chill down her spine, but she couldn't turn back now. The pull grew stronger, disregarding Carl's frantic words, she moved deeper into the woods, where shadows twisted like long fingers reaching for her. The air thickened as she stepped past the tree line, its dark embrace swallowing her whole. Each footfall sent a ripple of apprehension through her. Branches clawed at her arms, desperate to hold her back, but she pressed on, compelled by the cryptic message that teased her from the phone like a siren's call. Then she saw it, a dim glow flickering in the distance. Her heart raced, matching the rhythm of her steps. It pulsed like a heartbeat, drawing her closer. With every stride, the whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices swirling around her, echoing her grandfather's warnings. "Don't enter at night, don't trust what you cannot see," but it was too late. The clearing emerged before her, a wide circle where the ground felt strangely alive, pulsating underfoot. Strange symbols carved in the dirt glimmered faintly, glowing like embers. Emma froze, panic crashing through her veins. This had to be what Carl meant. The circle her grandfather wrote about. Whatever happened here was beyond her control. A shiver danced down her spine as the air crackled, thickening like fog. Then she saw them, figures cloaked in darkness, emerging from the trees, their movements fluid and hypnotic. They seemed to whisper, echoing the very shadows of her worst nightmares. Emma's breath hitched as she realized, they were waiting for her. "No, this can't be happening." She gasped, her voice trembling, but the darkness closed in, a looming presence that seemed intent on claiming her. In that moment of suffocating dread, the weight of her family's legacy pressed down, and she realized the real question: had her grandfather betrayed her bloodline, or had she walked blindly into a curse meant only for her? As the chanting grew louder, the figures advanced, and Emma's decision loomed ahead. Would she confront this terror head-on, or run back into the darkness of the woods, knowing it could swallow her whole? The shadows loomed closer, their haunting whispers echoing in her ears. "Join us or be lost forever." The air around her crackled with anticipation, and she felt the choice slipping away with every heartbeat. Would she find the truth or plunge into the abyss? Just as the first cold hand reached for her, a deafening howl split the night, shaking the ground beneath her. Everything stilled. Emma's fate hung in the balance, and with it, the chilling realization that whatever her grandfather had masked might be more than she ever dared to imagine. The howl echoed, a piercing sound that sliced through the oppressive silence like a knife. Emma's heart lurched, caught between fear and uncertainty. The figures halted, their shadowy forms recoiling slightly, as if the howl had disrupted some dark ritual. She took a shallow breath, adrenaline surging through her veins, urging her instincts to kick in. The moment of stillness felt like the eye of a storm. Emma's mind raced. What was that? Was it a warning? Was it a call? And then the realization hit her: Carl had screamed from outside the cabin. He was nearby. But where? "What do you want?" Her voice trembled, rising above the cacophony of whispers that spun around her. Join us. It was a chorus now, a haunting melody that urged her forward. Yet fear wrapped around her like a tight cocoon, anchoring her to the spot. The figures drew closer, their shapes blending into the darkness, an intoxicating mix of terror and allure. The warmth of the glowing symbols beneath her feet beckoned her, promising knowledge, power, a connection to her bloodline. No. She shook her head, defiant. The noise crescendoed, a violent wave crashing over her senses. She needed to move. She turned, her feet pounding against the damp earth, searching for an exit, but branches lashed at her, tugging her back into the darkness, threatening to draw her into that terrible circle of power. Emma! Another howl rang out, more guttural this time, a warning merging with instinct. Get away! It was Carl. The adrenaline surged upward, pushing her onward. The oppressive darkness felt alive, pressing against her from all sides, dashing through the trees. Emma felt unseen eyes bearing down upon her. Shadows flitted just beyond her vision, laughter mingling with the whispers. You cannot escape, you must embrace your fate. No. Her mind screamed. She refused to be trapped. The memory of the journal turned her blood cold. Her grandfather had warned her. He had entangled himself in something insidious, burdening her with a legacy she was unwilling to inherit. Suddenly, she broke through a dense thicket and stumbled into the dim glow of the moonlight. There, between the towering evergreens, stood Carl, his flashlight sweeping through the underbrush. Relief flooded through her even as panic clawed at her. Emma! You shouldn't have gone there. He shouted, his eyes wide with fear. Before she could reply, the ground quaked beneath them. The howl reverberated again, closer now, almost primal. Listless shadows flickered behind Carl, looming like dark memories. I saw them. They were waiting for you. He gasped, grabbing her arm tightly. We have to run. They'll follow. The realization flooded her. A path had been carved for her, and she had unwittingly walked into its center. But which way was safe? The woods around them felt alive, cognizant of their fear, hunting them. Flashes of light burst through the trees, faint, ghostly, luring her back. The voices resumed their chant, echoing in her mind, intoxicating her with the promise of knowledge and power. A rumbling sound echoed from the depths of the trees, drawing her attention back to Carl. Now! Before it's too late! They plunged forward, racing away with the shadows in pursuit. Each step echoed with lost warnings and dark inheritance. The treasures of blood beckoned, but so did the wrath of the woods. Just as they reached the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged, a tall silhouette, devoid of features, rising like a nightmare brought to life. Return, it whispered, its voice a chilling caress that seemed to wrap around her. Emma's instincts screamed for her to flee, yet she hesitated, torn between the darkness she came to understand and the world that was still hers. And in that fleeting moment of choice, she felt the lurking presence close in, far too intimate. The shadows shifted, eager and hungry for the final decision. What would she surrender in the name of survival? What would she lose? The air thickened with dread, every heartbeat a countdown. As the figure reached out towards them with a bone-chilling calm, Emma faced the terrifying truth. She might have to confront her grandfather's legacy, and the path that lay ahead could change everything. Emma's breath quickened as the shadow loomed closer, its featureless face an abyss that threatened to swallow her whole. Carl tightened his grip on her arm, his own fear reflected in his frantic eyes. We can't linger here. Her heart pounded, a war drum imploring her to choose. She knew the darkness was alive, but the chilling invitation from the figure seemed to cut deeper than the shadows swirling around them. What does it want? She whispered, desperation clawing at her throat. Nothing good, Carl hissed. It wants you. That word, the urgency of it sank in, its implications crashing over her like a bitter wave. She was being sought. The forces of the woods had marked her, hunted her down, and now here she was, caught in a web of her own family's dark history. We have to go. Carl's voice broke through, snapping her back to reality. He started pulling her away, but the figure stepped forward, blocking their path, an omnipresent barrier. Return, the voice echoed, wrapping around her like a vice. She felt its cold tendrils probing her thoughts, revealing memories long buried. Her grandfather's dark dealings, the whispers of rituals practiced in the dead of night, the sacrifices made in the name of power. No! Emma shouted, breaking free of the figure's grasp on her mind. She darted to the side, adrenaline pumping through her. They needed to escape. But how? The woods closed in, shifting and restless. Carl dragged her further into the thicket, but the air twisted around them, thick with bitterness and the scent of damp earth. "They're coming," he gasped, glancing over his shoulder. The ground shook again, a deeper resonance vibrating beneath their feet. From deep within the trees, a growl emerged, raw and primal, resonating with a promise of malevolence. "What is that?" Emma breathed, terror curling in her gut. They were no longer alone. The shadows weren't just lingering now, they were coalescing, forming dreadful silhouettes that danced just outside the reach of the flashlight beam. "Look!" Carl pointed ahead. The clearing widened into a chaos of gnarled roots and hooded figures flickering in and out of view. "There's a way out." The final glimmer of hope ignited a spark in Emma. But as they dashed forward, voices rose with a wail, the tension wrapping around them as the figures began to close in. "You cannot escape." It was a chant of disdain, weaving through the trees like poison. The figures surged around them, drawn towards Emma as if a magnet was silently commanding their dark allegiance. She felt the cold, clammy grasp of fear threatening to pull her down into the ground, an anchor made of dread holding her back. "Emma, please!" Carl pleaded, pulling her closer. "Don't let them take you." But the whisper of temptation pulled at her, the promise of legacy hovering at the edge of her thoughts, whispering sweet but toxic nothings. A choice lay ahead: embrace this dark destiny or claw her way back into the light. She hesitated as those shadowed figures danced hungrily, awaiting her decision. A howl pierced the night once more, fierce and echoing, sending a shock of primal fear through her core. It was no longer just Carl and her. What else lurked in the forest, eager to claim them when they faltered? "Emma!" Carl shouted, snapping her attention. "We need to decide now." The ground quaked beneath them as another piercing howl sliced through the air. What awaited them in the darkness? Would they make it to safety, or would the call of the woods draw them in, demanding a price none could afford? Dread filled the air, and Emma took a step toward her fate, the shadows eagerly anticipating her choice. Emma's pulse raced. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape the hungry eyes that filled the woods. But as she wavered, the shadows surged closer, their forms twisting and changing, hungry for her submission. "Emma! We can't just stand here." Carl's voice shattered her trance. With that, she found her feet again, turning away from the beckoning darkness. "Which way?" she shouted, panic lacing her words as she turned, breathless. The dim beam of their flashlight cut through the night, revealing hollow eyes and twisted limbs that surged forward in a cruel rhythm. "There!" Carl shouted, lunging toward a gap in the mass of shadows. Emma followed, her heart hammering in her chest like a desperate warning. As they sprinted, the ground shifted, heaving as if the forest itself were rejecting them. Roots reached out like fingers, twisting around their ankles. Emma stumbled, falling to her knees. "Get up!" Carl grabbed her shoulders, pulling her back to her feet. "We have to keep moving." His urgency compelled her. They couldn't let the shadows catch them, but the moment's urgency felt like a masquerade. The forest was alive, its dark energy heavy and suffocating. Behind them, the figures whispered in unison, their voices slithering through the air, forming echoes that clawed at her sanity. "You belong with us, not now," Emma cried, shaking her head. They needed to banish those words, to banish whatever pull the woods had on her. "We have to push through." Carl's grip tightened on her arm as they dashed deeper into the thicket. Their flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering like candlelight on the brink of extinguishing. "Keep it steady," she urged, fear amplifying her voice. "Don't." The light flickered out altogether. "Carl." Darkness swallowed them whole, trembling silence wrapping around them like a suffocating cloak. It was a void that gnawed at her heart, leaving only echoes of their frantic breaths. A rustle broke through the chill, sending a jagged slice of dread through Emma. The indistinct shapes closed in, their intentions as murky as their forms. "Where are you?" she hissed, her voice barely a whisper, searching for Carl in the pitch black. "Right here." His voice quavered, a tremor of fear slicing through his words. As instincts screamed in her mind, a deeper growl reverberated through the ground beneath, the air heavy with malice, a warning that punctured her confidence. The woods were alive, pulsing with maleficence. "Drop!" she yelled instinctively, pulling Carl to the ground just as something rushed overhead, a shadow that seemed to blend into the void surrounding them. He landed beside her, both bracing against the damp earth. "What was that?" His voice nearly cracked. Emma's heart thundered as she held her breath, each second stretching into eternity. The shadows hesitated for just a moment, as if sensing their vulnerability. "Maybe we can." But before she could finish, the growl returned, this time closer, a booming threat that entwined with the whispers. The hunt was on. The shadows seemed to pulse with malevolence, erupting into chaotic movement around them. Emma's thoughts spiraled her grandfather's dark legacy, the unspeakable choices that lingered in her bloodline. That a sudden clap of thunder rattled the sky. The looming storm broke, and heavy rain began to pour, drowning the sounds of the shadows. It was both a blessing and a curse. Would they finally have a chance to escape, or would the turmoil be more enticing to whatever hunted them? "Where do we go?" Carl gasped, struggling to keep his footing. "Look!" Emma pointed as a faint shimmer broke through the underbrush, another clearing, barely visible through the onslaught of rain. "Maybe it's a way out." The shadows hissed angrily, the howls rising in pitch. "Go!" Emma pushed Carl forward into the downpour. With each step, the weight of her heritage felt closer, and perhaps more monstrous. But as they reached the edge of the clearing, the ground surged again, fissures swallowing parts of the earth whole, and she hesitated at the precipice of the unknown. "Emma!" Carl called, eyes wide with both fear and urgency. Would they step into freedom or something far worse? The dark figure from before loomed at the periphery of her vision, and as it caught sight of Emma again, its voice rang clear and compelling. Come home. What lay in this new expanse just ahead? Would it be salvation, or was it too late to escape the dark destiny knit into her veins? They stood at the edge of the clearing, drenched and trembling, the rain washing away the last remnants of light from their fading flashlight. Emma's heart raced as she struggled to decide. The howls from the shadows grew louder, as if they could sense her hesitation. Each note was a promise of pain, a beckoning crueler than any she'd ever known. "We can't just stand here," Carl cried, his voice a desperate plea beneath the roar of the storm. Emma shot him a glance, seeing the wild fear flickering in his eyes. It mirrored her own. The shadows were closing in, stalking them with patience and hunger. She took a step toward the shimmering light, her instincts battling with the suffocating dread. "Emma, don't," Carl warned. But the shift in her chest was electric, pulling her. "I can feel something, I can't explain it." The ground beneath her shuddered, as if it wished to swallow her whole. "Then let it go. We may not get another chance." Thunder cracked overhead, splitting the night sky, echoing inside her head. With a shaky breath, she took a step back as the shadows lunged. There was no choice, either they plunged into the unknown or faced whatever hunted them in the dark. "Now!" Emma yelled, and they sprinted forward into the clearing, drenched and gasping. As they reached the center, the air shifted, it was charged, thick with energy swirling around them. The shimmer intensified, revealing a circle of ancient stones, marked with crude symbols, darkened by weather and time. This wasn't merely a clearing, it was a sacred ground, a marker of something long forgotten. "What is this place?" Carl murmured, frozen at her side. Emma could hardly breathe. Her grandfather had whispered about places like this, places tethered to their bloodline, places that held the power of generations. She pressed her palms against the cool stone, feeling a pulse in reply, and the rain began to slow. Suddenly, a howl cut through the clearing, sharper and nearer than before. Emma whirled around, heart in her throat. The figures were slipping into sight, merging with the shadows, their hollow eyes glowing. "They know we're here," Carl shouted, voice breaking. She turned her attention back to the stones. What if they could harness this energy? Maybe they'll protect us. She didn't know, but the idea formed like a thread, a desperate strand of hope. "Do you really think?" Carl glanced nervously at the approaching figures. "What if it just makes them angrier? Do you have a better idea?" It was a last-ditch question, laced with fear. As the shadows pressed forward, suffocating the last remnants of light, Emma closed her eyes. She felt her blood stir, resonating with the ancient power. Summoning every ounce of bravado, she shouted, "I am of this line. I claim this space." The air thickened, wrapping them in a cocoon of tension. And then the ground shook. The shadows slowed, their malicious whispers transforming to uncertainty. Then, one figure stepped out from the throng, a hulking silhouette cloaked in darkness. Its eyes burned like hot coals, and for a moment, Emma felt her resolve shatter like glass. It was neither fear nor dread, but an intense recognition that gripped her heart. This creature was part of her, woven into her very being. It belonged to her bloodline just as much as she did to it. Emma. Carl's voice quavered, dread creeping back into the atmosphere as the entity drew closer, every inch of its movement laden with ominous intent. The shadows swirled around them, eager for a final decision. Would she forsake her past, or embrace the darkness that beckoned? Emma stood there, trembling, torn between the call of her family legacy and the desperate will to survive. What would happen if she chose the wrong path? "Help us," she whispered to the stones, feeling the currents of her ancestry pulse against her skin. But she was met with silence as the shadows howled louder. Then, the ground cracked beneath their feet. Emma's stomach dropped, the earth was coming apart. They hadn't just stumbled upon the darkness of the woods, they had awakened something. "Emma! We need to go!" Carl screamed, but the stone beneath her pulsed fiercely. She couldn't leave without knowing. Was this a trap, or a chance at salvation? The truth was spiraling out of reach, and with that crack echoing in the night, she couldn't escape wondering what dark legacy awaited her. The crack resonated deeply, expanding, a gaping maw ready to consume them both. The shadows encroached further, the air thick with palpable malevolence. Emma's hands shook against the stone, its cold surface felt alive, thrumming with ancient energy. "Emma!" Carl shouted again, voice tinged with panic. "We can't stay." As if answering his plea, the darkness whispered around them like a cold wind, carrying echoes of past grievances and spectral warnings. Emma felt every hair stand on end. This wasn't merely fear, it was a recognition of something profound and terrible. "Let go." Carl pulled at her arm, desperation flaring in his tone. "We don't belong here." But she pushed against his grasp, feeling the stone's pulse synchronize with her heartbeat. "I can't. I have to know." The shadows swirled like smoke, a heavy presence creeping closer. Suddenly, she remembered the tales her grandfather told of the bloodlines tied to these stones, the ancient rites performed to summon protection. But what if those rites had twisted over generations into something else? What if her ties bound her to a darkness best left buried? A shadow lunged forward, an amorphous figure that flickered in and out of reality, scrambling for its moment of revelation. Emma swallowed hard, fear twisting her stomach into knots. "What do you want?" she called, voice firm, but trembling. The figure paused, then morphed into the visage of a man, wild hair, eyes like bottomless pits. He stared at her with an unsettling familiarity. A chill gripped her as recognition washed over her. It was her grandfather. "Emma," he rasped, voice husky and strained. "You've come to reclaim it, haven't you?" "Reclaim what?" Her heart raced. The rain had stopped, but the oppressive atmosphere thickened, allowing every echo of her voice to linger in the air. He stepped closer, a darkness spilling from him like mist. "The power, it will consume you if you do not control it. You must decide." "Decide what?" Carl pressed closer, fear evident on his face. "Emma, don't listen." "No." She snapped, suddenly fiercely protective of this heavy legacy. "I want to hear." The creature's eyes smoldered, drawing her in further. "You are the chosen, Emma. Your blood flows with the energy of the ancients. Embrace it, and you will command the shadows, bend them to your will." "Command them?" The word slithered into her mind, twisting her thoughts. But what would that really mean? The shadows were hungry, always lurking, waiting for the moment of weakness to seize their chance. "Or let them consume you," he added, tilting his head, the flicker of a smile teasing the corners of his mouth, revealing razor-sharp teeth. A sudden wind whipped through the clearing, carrying rancid scents of decay and old moss, but it mingled with the desire to belong, to find a place in the dark. She felt torn. The shadow's call was a siren's song, so tempting, so alluring. "Emma." Carl's voice yanked her back. "This isn't a game. But this is my heritage." She shot back, casting her gaze between Carl and the looming figure. "I can't run from it. I'm meant to be here." The ground quaked again, fissures opening, swallowing shards of earth and stone. The shadows began to flicker restlessly, eager to embrace her. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice shaky as she wrestled with the tantalizing energy flowing through her veins. "Choose wisely," her grandfather hissed, stretching out a dark hand. "Once you step forward, you cannot go back." The ground split wider, reaching for her like a greedy mouth. The shadows surged forward, hungry for influence, for power, and she felt a tugging in her very soul. "Emma, you have to trust me," Carl shouted, panic etched onto his face. "Don't break the line." Yet her heart pulsed loud and wild, the ancient whispers promising strength, filled with smoke and darkness and promise. As the shadows inched closer, Emma's heartbeat synchronized with the relentless pounding of her past. What if she stepped across that threshold? Would she finally embrace who she was meant to be, or would she provoke the monstrous depths of her ancestry? The weight of her decision crashed around her. With one fierce breath, she leaned into the darkness, heart racing. What would she awaken next? The moment Emma crossed into the shadows, a jolt surged through her, sending a shockwave of raw, pulsing energy coursing through her veins. The darkness enveloped her, a thick blanket crushing down, wrapping around her like a lover gone cold. Dread twisted in her gut, but she was anchored by the familiar gaze of her grandfather, the man who had spun tales of strength and destiny. "Embrace it," he urged, his voice echoing off the jagged rocks surrounding them. "Only then will the truth be revealed." Carl gripped her arm tighter, eyes wide with terror. "Emma, please. This isn't who you are. Fight it." The shadows swirled dangerously close, hungry whispers clawing at the edges of her mind, weaving promises of power and dominion. They stung her thoughts, echoing, relentless. She clutched her temples, struggling to maintain control, but the energy felt intoxicating, like the first taste of a forbidden drink. "What truth?" Emma cried, losing herself in the mass of conflicting emotions. "What are you asking me to do?" "Unlock your potential." Her grandfather howled, an urgency in his voice that both enticed and terrified her. Voices thrashed in the air, overlapping like a cacophony of desperate souls. She heard her name whispered among them, a sweet lament, a taunt. The ground trembled beneath her feet as visions flashed in her mind, images of ancient rituals, blood, and shadows dancing under a waning moon. Suddenly, something shifted. A shape broke from the shadows, coalescing into a figure. Distorted and blurred, it was another man, one of Emma's ancestors, his face twisted in agony and rage. "Return what you've taken," he growled, lips curling back to reveal teeth stained like the earth beneath them. "Your blood is tainted." "What? What have I done?" "Your ancestors were cursed." He lunged closer, the smell of rot accompanying him. "It lies within you. You must set it free or become its vessel." Panic clawed at her throat. Emma's heart raced, pounding against her ribs, trying to express the primal fear surging within her. She was trapped in a storm of accusation, her legacy now as much a curse as a blessing. Each pulse of energy whispered darkly, as if the shadows around her were omniscient waiting. "Emma, don't engage with them," Carl shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You have to fight back. Remember who you are." But who was she? The identities of her ancestors crowded her mind, blurring the lines between who she had been and who she could become. Would she rise to the challenge or slip into a void they had created, losing every vestige of her humanity? The shadows surged forward, a tide threatening to pull her under as they seized her will. Tendrils snaked around her ankles, dragging her toward the gaping maw of the earth splitting before them. Raw, primal energy crackled within her, a lightning storm licking at her skin. "Refuse!" Carl screamed, breaking through the cracked veil of her reverie. "We are more than this. You're stronger than them." Emma closed her eyes, desperately trying to distinguish the voices of her ancestors from her own thoughts. "Focus," she commanded herself. It was a battle more spiraling than that of body. She may have been born from this legacy, but she had the choice. Her will was hers to claim. With a sputtering breath, she extended her hands, reaching toward Carl, but as she did, the shadows responded violently, writhing and hissing, unleashing a chorus of fury that rattled the stones around them. Before she could open her mouth, they surged, dark and unforgiving, pulling at her essence. "Do it. Lend me your strength." Her grandfather's voice reverberated ominously, redoubling her fears. As dread surged anew, her blood seemed to boil. Then, without thinking, she shouted the only word that came to her mind, a primal declaration against the tightening coils of despair that tried to swallow her whole. Enough. A moment of silence hung in the air, then a brilliant light exploded from her core, illuminating the shadows like a bright flame piercing the darkest night. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. But she had unleashed something uncontrollable. What had she truly awakened beneath the weight of heritage? Would she hold the shadows in command, or become their plaything? As the blinding light spread, the echoes of her thoughts whispered back. The cacophony swirled once more, but now with a different tone. A challenge issued from the very depths of darkness. What power had she just grasped, and what would it demand in return? The radiance surged forth, banishing the darkness if only for an instant. Emma felt a radiant energy ripple through her, filling her lungs with a sharp breath of defiance. Her heart pounded, an insistent drumbeat against the chaos surrounding her. But the shadows were not done with her. They recoiled for a moment, hissing, but then, like a flock of predatory birds, they circled again. Their whispers turned into a unified roar, promising vengeance on the bloodline that had wronged them. Emma's chest tightened as a chill snaked down her spine. She had dared to resist them, and now their thirst for retribution would be insatiable. "Emma!" Carl's voice broke through the cacophony, but it sounded distant, muffled as if he were underwater. "You have to control it. Focus." She nodded, heart racing, but the darkness pressed in, swirling around her with renewed fury. Tendrils reached for her, brushing against her skin like icy fingers. Emma's mind raced as memories began to flood her, snippets of recent conversations with her grandfather and the secrets he had held, all the warnings he had overlooked or disguised. "You can either harness it or let it consume you," a voice echoed from within, foreign yet achingly familiar, the tone of her ancestor's darkness. "This is a curse," she shouted, though her words felt feeble against the rising tempest. "Not a gift." The laughter that followed sent icy shivers down her spine. It was a sound that seemed to mock her, as though something wicked within was relishing her fear. She closed her eyes, recalling every tale, every warning that had been passed down through years of silence. Each whispered fragment felt alive, energy coiling and uncoiling within her. The shadows danced more fiercely now, dark forms flickering just beyond her vision, weaving grotesque shapes that threatened to swallow her whole. She fought against the tide, determined to remain herself, but their presence seeped into her thoughts. Dark desires whispered promises that twisted and turned, enticing her with power she could hardly fathom. Embrace the darkness, they urged, voices overlapping amidst the chaos. Power is yours for the taking. No. Emma screamed, clutching her head as her vision darkened at the edges surrounding her. She could feel her grandfather's presence flickering, an anchor and a warning, drifting further as shadows encroached. Suddenly, the light surged again, every corner of the earth around her glowing brighter, illuminating the hidden horrors beneath. Screams of agony erupted from the darkness, shadows retreating as if they were frightened by the light. What had risen from her core was not merely her legacy but a manifestation of every wrong done to her ancestors for generations. Carl. She called, desperate to reclaim her footing. We can't let them. But when she turned to him, her heart dropped. Carl was locked in a battle with the shadows, his face pinched with fear. They clawed at him, dark tendrils wrapping around his arms, pulling him into a dark spiral. Get away! Emma shouted, lurching forward, wanting to reach for him but feeling the overwhelming power crackling between them. Emma! You're the key! He shouted, struggling, gasping. You can break this cycle. The darkness swelled, more menacing than ever, a mass of howling despair as she focused her mind, the power flaring. Could she do it? Could she wield the energy she had unlocked without succumbing to its dark desires? With one last surge of determination, she summoned her strength, heart thundering in her chest. She could hear the whispers turning frantic as she pushed her light forward, forcing it to envelop Carl, to lift him from the abyss, but the shadows recoiled, furious, a wrathful scream erupting that resonated deep in her bones. They were strong, too strong. As the darkness clawed at her mind, dissonance hung in the air, the shadows shifting into something more hideous, something unfathomable. Nothing can be undone, they sulked. You'll learn the price for these attempts. In that moment, a warning rang clear. She had opened a door that could never be closed, and the consequences would weave themselves into her fate. Emma braced herself, readying for whatever was about to come. What had she truly unleashed, and at what cost? Emma's heart thundered as she faced the storm of shadows, each wave crashing against her resolve. The darkness writhed, eager to reclaim what had perhaps never belonged to her, what she had unwittingly awakened. With each breath, she felt Carl's struggle seep into her, a current of desperation coursing through them as the shadows hounded closer, their whispers growing more pronounced. Emma, listen to me. Carl gasped, caught in an entanglement of darkness that was tightening with every vain effort to free himself. You're the one who can end this. You've got to summon everything within you. Use the light. Light? She exclaimed, confusion lacing her words. What light? I'm losing myself. It felt like an ocean rising around her, drowning her in uncertainty. The shadows laughed, their mocking chorus cutting through her resolve, but then she remembered. The stories her grandfather had told her, the flickers of truth buried beneath the layers of darkness. They weren't just stories, they were a guide. With newfound clarity, she felt the pulse of power inside her, a bright ember awakening under the weight of her ancestry. Let him go. She shouted, summoning that ember, allowing it to swell within her. The movement of shadow around Carl hesitated, drawn back by the unwavering strength surging through her. She envisioned herself as a beacon of brilliance, the light fighting against the malevolence, a guardian made from her bloodline. Taking a deep breath, she pushed forward, channeling every ounce of her willpower into that glowing core. I reject you. She roared, and with that proclamation, the shadows within drew tighter, reeling as her light surged forward like a tidal wave, crashing against the oncoming darkness. Carl's eyes widened as the light pierced the void, illuminating the chamber of shadows surrounding them. That's it. Keep going. He urged, his voice a lifeline amid the chaos. Stay with me. We can break this. Emma felt her determination grow, unfurling like a brightly colored flag against a storm. Embracing the energy, she thrust her hands outward. Her light erupted, enveloping Carl, forcing the darkness to retreat, to shed its skin and withdraw in terror. No! Echoed the tortured wails of the shadows as their forms rippled and twisted, the figures losing form, displaced by the presence of Emma's vibrant energy. The air crackled with tension, and her heart surged with newfound courage. She was a part of this battle, a heartbeat against despair, and she wouldn't let them win. The moment flickered alive, a dance between light and shadow. She felt the collective pain of her lineage, the curse of the past clawing at her mind, but this time, she wasn't afraid. You don't claim me. She shouted, each word a hammer struck against the anvil of darkness. Each syllable blistered the night air, becoming a sword unsheathing ancestral power. Carl struggled free from the tendrils gripping him, breaking through the veil with sheer determination. Together, they formed a vanguard, standing side by side against the encroaching void. We can push them away. Together. He urged, with a fierce nod. Emma locked her gaze on the nightmarish shadows peeling away, swaths of dark energies flaked to reveal glimpses of freedom. We are more than this. She declared. I'm not just a pawn in your game. The resonance of her voice rocked the shadows, wrapping them in shock, while she cooked the essence of every whispered promise of her ancestors into one brilliant surge. I am Emma, daughter of the line, and I control my fate. The shadows shrieked, a horrible cacophony as they tore at the air, retreating back into the abyss, the shrouded place from which they had manifested. With one last pulse of light, smooth and fierce, darkness broke beneath Emma's will. It swirled once more before collapsing in on itself, a black hole receding into the night. A hush fell over the clearing as the last remnants of shadow dissipated. The stone circle glowed faintly, acknowledging her triumph. They stood amidst the remnants of a storm that had threatened to consume them both. We did it. Carl's voice was a breath of disbelief, eyes wide with awe, yet filled with the last vestiges of fear. Yeah, Emma replied, panting, every bone in her body thrumming with energy. But the legacy isn't gone. It's part of me now. In that moment, she felt that the history, stories yet untold, and a connection to those who had come before her. They would not define her, but share with her the power to shape her destiny. But what happens now? Carl questioned, still adjusting to the tattered remnants of fear lingering. Emma turned back toward the woods, knowing there would always be remnants of shadow around. Now, she began, a calm spreading through her, I learn how to balance the light with the dark. The journey ahead felt clearer, a road lined with both challenges and extraordinary possibilities. With a last glance at the cabin in the distance, Emma knew this was an end and a beginning. Let us go home. The woods held their breath, granting them passage as they turned away, the silence now a promise of adventure ahead, and with that, they stepped forward into the unknown, finally free to forge their own legacy, illuminated by their battle against the shadows. Subscribe immediately if you don't want to miss what's next, because trust me, you need to stay tuned for exclusive stories. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and show your support. Flood the comments section with your reactions. What do you think happened to Emma and Carl? What's next for them? And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You're the true fans who understand that every action counts.